All right, so I don't need to remind anybody what the slap was, right? We all remember what happened at the Oscars a month ago. Will Smith got up and slapped Chris Rock in front of the entire world, or at least whoever was actually watching the Oscars, because, apparently nobody really does that anymore. Now, obviously, everyone and their mothers have already given their takes around what happened that night, and so there's nothing that I could really say about it that would be new or even really insightful at this point. But I did want to talk about talking about the slap, because I had a situation in my personal life where I kind of lost sight of what was important about the entire event, and it took someone close to me reminding me about that. And it's something that I want to keep in mind if something like this happens again, which it obviously will. So anyway, I remember that night I wasn't even watching the Oscars. I had no idea that it was even happening, but I kind of had this routine at the time where I would check Reddit every night before I went to bed. And so I opened up the app, and the first thing I see, obviously, is some meme about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. And I was like, oh snap, what happened? And so I looked at it, I looked at some of the comments, and kind of got a general understanding of what happened that night. And then I left that post and I started scrolling, and that's when I realized just how impactful what had happened was. Because literally every single post was about this incident. And I don't think I've ever seen that on Reddit. Even when the war first broke out in Ukraine, sure, the majority of the posts were about the war breaking out, but there were still so many other news stories that were happening at the time that were still reaching the top posts of the day. But for whatever reason, that night, this incident dominated the front page. And even at that time, I can remember being kind of annoyed by this, but really just because one thing dominating the front page just robbed me of my nightly experience. I just really enjoyed the process of kind of just getting a taste of all the different things that were happening in the world. And that's why checking Reddit every night was part of my nightly routine. I was just very selfishly annoyed that this was the only news that I was getting that day. But anyway, the next day I woke up and, after my morning routine, I checked YouTube, and of course, every one of my favorite content creators had made a video about this incident. And at that point, I just remember feeling very jaded, to the point where I didn't even watch most of their videos. Again, I kind of felt like I already got the gist of everything that I needed to get from the first post that I had seen the night before. And so I just didn't really feel like I needed 50 different takes about it. But I do remember at some point I actually just gave in and watched a few different takes on it, and every single one of the videos that I watched, they either went deeper on a point that I was already thinking about, or they presented new information or new insights that I hadn't really even considered. I mean, I remember specifically at that point, I didn't know that Will Smith actually went on to win the Oscar. And so watching one of these content creators actually talk about the incident in its totality gave me a whole different insight that I hadn't even considered at that time. And so a lot of that jadedness that I felt at the beginning, when I was already fatigued by everybody talking about this, was already being shown to be useless and just a reflection of my own conceit, because I thought to myself that I already understand everything that I need to know about this situation. However, at the time, I didn't think this. It's only now that I'm reflecting on this entire situation that I can look back and realize that that was going on. But at the time, I still felt that jadedness. I still felt that fatigue from everybody talking about this. So anyway, fast forward, I don't know, maybe a week or two, and I was talking with my sister, and we had this long conversation, just catching up on each other's lives, as we usually do. But eventually the conversation worked its way to this incident. And remember, at the time, I couldn't really articulate any of the things that I've just talked about in this video. So I was still just feeling this fatigue with the whole situation. And so I remember when we started talking about it, that's what I expressed to my sister. And so I remember just complaining to her about how this whole thing was just so inescapable, and that I'm just so tired of everybody talking about this as if there aren't more important things in the world, and how it's been beaten to death and there's no new insight in this and that, and just thinking myself so self-righteous. Now obviously I didn't say all of that, but I think to some degree I was feeling that. Just this idea that we're also wrapped up in this when there are so many more important things taking place right now, and how that is part of the problem. And so my sister just, very calmly listened to me, as she always does, and then she presented her own perspective on the situation. And have you ever had someone share their beliefs with you and have those beliefs resonate so deeply with you that you straight up just feel ashamed of the beliefs that you just shared with that person? Yeah, so that's what happened. And basically my sister just explained that to her, talking about these things has a lot of value. There's so much insight to be gained through these discussions. You know, whether or not we overfixate on these kinds of things is up for debate, and there's probably a real discussion to be had there. However, the actual discussion of the topic is one that's important and does have value, because it does illuminate to some degree different aspects of the human experience, and anything that has the ability to do that is worth discussing. And again, she only shared this as her perspective. She didn't offer this as a counterpoint. We weren't having an argument. She accepted what I had said, and she said, well, to her, this is what she believes. And it's lucky we weren't having an argument or a debate, because I immediately capitulated on everything that I had just said. And it was interesting because it felt like she was saying something to me that I had already believed, but that I had just forgotten about because I was so over this whole incident. And so her saying it again out loud was kind of like her unearthing this thing that I had allowed my jadedness to bury. And yeah, I just hit a complete 180. And so at that point, I had pretty much only consumed what other people were saying about the incident and then formulated my own opinions based off of what they were saying. But I hadn't really discussed the situation with anybody. Partially because, again, at that point, I was so tired of it all that I didn't want to contribute to this onslaught of opinions about it. But now, because of what she said, I was willing to discuss it, and we talked for a while about it. And remember a lot of the things that I had said earlier in this video about how I was actually gaining a lot of insight about the situation from actually listening to other people's opinions about it. I only started to be able to articulate all of that after this discussion with my sister. And so thanks to my sister, I actually went on and had discussions with other people who were close to me about what happened that night. And just the direction that some of these discussions ended up going in, I couldn't have ever imagined that we would end up talking about some of these topics because of this thing that happened at the Oscars. And not just the topics, but getting to learn what the people closest to me genuinely think about some of these situations and some of these happenings was incredibly interesting. Again, these are some of the people that are closest to me, and so I just assumed that, you know, we had very similar takeaways from what happened that night. And so learning that that wasn't the case and that we had very different views, not just about what happened that night, but even topics outside of that, was a very interesting and eye-opening process. One that would have never happened if my sister hadn't rearranged my entire perspective. But it's one that's brought about an awareness that I didn't have before. And again, going back to what my sister said, that's valuable. And so now, looking back on this incident as a whole, I realized that every time that I actually engaged with the topic, I learned something new. Now, it wasn't always something that I agreed with or something that I would actually assimilate into my own personal belief structure, but it doesn't have to be for it to be valuable. And like I said at the beginning, I had kind of lost sight of the importance of having these conversations because of my jadedness and fatigue with the whole situation. But fortunately, I had my sister there to remind me of what was actually important about the slap. And yeah, so I wanted to make this just to make sure that in case something like this happens again, which again, it definitely will, that I remember not to get too wrapped up in everybody talking about it and try to remember what's important about the situation in the first place and the potential insight that can actually be gained by discussing it. Now, obviously, I know that not everybody discusses these things with the best of intentions. Sure, a lot of it is for clout. It was the big story of the time, and so a lot of people were discussing it just because it had to be discussed. Talking about it meant you'd get views and clicks and revenue and all of that stuff. And so sure, there's that side of it. But basically, I had used that understanding as justification for my belief that everybody that was talking about it was doing it for those purposes. Not because there was a genuine interest in trying to understand the differences in how we perceive and experience these things, but just because that exists doesn't mean that all discussions around the topic are without value. And I needed to be reminded of that. But anyway, I'm probably rambling now, so just gonna end this one here. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you watching. Thank you for indulging me. You know, just had to put out another extremely timely, relevant, and topical take about pop culture. No, I'm not late. Everyone else was just way too early. But no, again, thank you for watching, and I hope it made sense. On a more meta note, I'm back to doing these unscripted again. I don't know, I kind of want to just practice organizing my thoughts without having to write them down. Again, it has its benefits, but also I do forget things a lot, and I don't always make my point as clearly as I'd hoped to. I mean, the last video that I did about the devious licks trend, I remember I had to get rid of like 5 or 6 other points that I'd made because I just did a terrible job of expressing them. And so watching it back, I was actually cringing, and I was like, yeah, I can't put this out. But I'm hoping to get better at that. So anyway, we'll see how long this lasts. I might go back to scripted. I might keep it unscripted. But Anyway, that's too much information. Doesn't matter. So again, I'll just say thank you for watching. And with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.